Hello, everyone, and welcome to Zoom's showcase on building a simple phone call logger powered by the Zoom Rivet SDK. My name is Decorian Hurd, and I'm a partner engineer on our developer relations team here at Zoom. In this session, I'll walk you through implementing your first Zoom Rivet application. Before we get started, just a quick note, some of today's content may be forward-looking, so please take a look or please take a moment to review our safe harbor statement. All right. As we all know, logging app information is crucial for maintaining transparency with how the app is being used. We can reference reliable information about the app when addressing use cases such as billing, auditing, and troubleshooting. For phone calls, this can include when a call is made, who made the call, who was the call recipient, and what are the details of that call session. For our agenda, we'll learn about how Zoom Rivet can help stand up a fully functional Zoom Phone API and webhook receiver, which we'll use to implement the call logger. As we're integrating Rivet into our existing backend server code, we'll see function by function how easy it is to get a logging app running in your local environment. So what is Rivet? On a high level, Zoom Rivet is a server-side framework that streamlines the development and interaction with Zoom OAuth authentication, REST APIs, and webhooks. It drastically reduces the development time of those three features by offering an API that handles boilerplate implementation. This logic includes managing authentication, making API calls, and receiving event notifications under the hood. Rivet comes boxed with 7 modules that handle the vast majority of use cases a developer will come across. Today, we'll focus on the Zoom Phone module, which we'll use to build the call logger. This call logger will be a Node.js app using Express for the external API endpoints, LowDB for a simple local data store for our logged events, and the Zoom Rivet SDK for handling the grunt work of subscribing and listening to Zoom Phone events. I'll expose 3 endpoints on the server for assigning a calling plan and phone number to our Zoom Phone user. I'll also use Postman as a client to make the API calls to those endpoints. So let's quickly go over installation and configuration from a developer perspective. On Marketplace, we'll need a server-to-server OAuth app that will produce an access token to authorize access and management of user data. On the App Credentials tab, the credentials here will be given to Rivet, which will then use to authenticate the user and generate an access token. This token is then used to call the Zoom REST API, where it manages your Zoom users and their respective data. On the Feature tab, we can choose to subscribe to Zoom webhooks. We'll subscribe to the phone events here for our call logger. We'll also need the secret token so Rivet can verify that our app is receiving authentic Zoom webhooks. In the event subscription section, we'll need to use ngrok to expose the receivers of the local server to the internet. The ngrok link below is pointed to port 5011, which is the port we chose for the module in the app. So we'll take that ngrok link and append /zoom/events to it and subscribe to the desired events for this app. In the Scopes tab, we'll add all scopes corresponding to the endpoints our token will grant access to. The endpoints will be used later for configuring our Zoom Phone user. And once those apps are configured, we'll take the generated credentials and put them in the .env file located in our project. Finally, we'll need to specify a starting port for this application, which will be port 5010 for the main server. Okay, that's all the setup we'll need on the marketplace and project configuration side. For project implementation, I prepared a pre-recorded demo that will dive into the code of the application. So let me go ahead and switch my share to that. Here we go. So This is our backend app that will integrate the Rivet SDK into. For the sake of time, I have the non-Rivet code snippets already implemented, including server configuration and LowDB configuration. All we'll have to do is just add the Rivet portion. Starting at index.ts, the app will use the specified port in the .m file, in this case, port 5010. The start server function activates the three main components of our app. First, the phone module, second, the endpoints, and then the event receivers. Let's take a look at these three components. In modules TS, the code shows our current Express and LowDB imports, as well as their configuration. We'll need to add the Rivet import and configuration as well. So we'll start by importing the Rivet phone module. Since we're importing, or since we're using server to server, I'll import the server to server specific module. I'll also import the Rivet logger, which we can use for logging and debugging purposes. Next, I'll instantiate the phone server to server auth client and provide a configuration object, which will include our credentials and a port number of my choice. Our ngrok connection here is listening on port 5011, so the phone module will communicate through that same port. Next, I'll instantiate the Rivet logger, a function for our phone module, or to start our phone module, and two other functions to create the Express endpoints and start the Rivet event receiver. Phone.ts, this is where we'll house our Express endpoints, where the server will use Rivet to make the REST API calls to Zoom. This will implement three API calls. First, to assign a calling plan to a Zoom user on my account. Second, to list all available Zoom phone numbers we have on our account. And three, to assign one of those phone numbers to that user. For the first endpoint, our code first verifies the request contains the required data and its query parameters. This data is then structured into objects that Rivet will use for the API call to Zoom. From there, Rivet makes the API call to the Zoom cloud and returns the Zoom response to the Postman client. For the second endpoint, we simply need to call the list phone numbers Rivet method for it to retrieve the numbers that we'll use for our user. And for the third endpoint, we'll take the phone number and user data included in the request, format that data into an object to give to Rivet, and have Rivet handle the grunt work of processing the API call to Zoom. So for each of these requests, you should know that Rivet objects will always follow the request body schema required by its corresponding Zoom REST endpoints. If you check out our API documentation for these respective endpoints, you'll see that the required data for the request will match to the required Rivet method parameters. With that said, let's take a look at these requests in Postman. In Postman, I have three API calls configured. I already made the respective API calls for all of these endpoints, so we'll take a look at the request and response data for each one. For the slash assign calling plan endpoint, we specify a user ID, a call plan type, and the billing account ID. Our response from the server confirms that the calling plan was assigned to the user. On the next call, I requested a list of all available Zoom phone numbers on my account, which I then receive as a response from the server. Finally, we take one of those numbers and its respective ID from that list and use it in the final API call to assign the phone number to our Zoom phone user. To reiterate, these three API calls are made to my backend server, which then uses Zoom Rivet to then make the actual API call to the Zoom cloud. The responses from the Zoom cloud are then handled and restructured by Rivet and then passed back to our Postman client. Now that our user is configured for Zoom Phone, We can now implement the receiver portion of the call logger. In phone events.ts, we simply need to subscribe to the events that we want Rivet to listen for by passing in the event name and callback function that will perform an operation upon receiving that event. So here, I'll create an array that includes all available events to listen for in Zoom Phone. Of course, one can string this to listen to only their desired events. Next, I'll create a callback function that fires once any of these events have been received by Rivet. This function searches for the call ID of the event given to us in the payload object and adds that event to our LoadDB store. Finally, we run a loop that subscribes to each of these events and the callback to Rivet, where it will now listen for these events. So now I'll test this application by making a phone call from my Zoom phone client. So here, let's type in my number and make the call. You should hear my phone ringing in the background. All right, and we're already seeing events being logged here. So we see events being logged in the server console, but we also see in LoadDB, specifically the db.json file, that the events are added under their respective call IDs. These events include call setup to call ending webhook events and include a ton of information about our phone calls, which can be used for a multitude of different use cases. And now we have a simple call logger with a little more than just 150 lines of code, thanks to Zoom Rivet SDK. All right, so that concludes the demo portion of this session. Now that we have the simple use case implemented, there are many ways in which this app can be augmented, where we utilize additional Zoom Rivet features to handle more complex use cases. This includes using multiple modules in the same backend server, sending data directly to a Lambda function from Rivet for serverless cloud processing, building your own Rivet CLI for one-time operations and scripting, and much, much more. Unfortunately, we're out of time for demos, but we do have sessions that will cover more Rivet SDK use cases, so definitely tune into those. You can also check out our GitHub, which houses sample apps for many of the Zoom features that you learned about today. I hope everybody enjoyed the demo and is inspired to start integrating this awesome tool into their projects. As you saw, the development time is drastically reduced, and you're also assured you are coding within Zoom's best practices. Okay, so since we have a little bit of extra time here, I would like to open up the session for any questions. I see a couple of questions in the Q&A, so I'll go ahead and address some of those. Uh, let's see. So John asked, does Rivet allow you to save data to a server database for your app login and save or access other data? Uh, yes, so Zoom Rivet SDK does offer APIs where you can upload your access tokens. You can specify your database credentials within Zoom Rivet, which it will directly send those access tokens to your database. And then you can retrieve those in your database or automatically refresh those uh, using Rivet as well. Hopefully that answers your question from there. And I also see another question from John, or actually a statement. He's saying he's becoming a fan of Zoom Rivet, and I'm super happy to hear. um, Another question from Kanak here. I know I can get, let's see, I know I can get the user info who have installed my app using the OAuth process when they install, but that's just once. Is there any way we can get user info every time I want? Any thought for that? Um, so Rivet, say if you want to query the API or query Zoom's REST API for user data, that can be a one-time process using Rivet if you want, the same way you would use Postman to query for data once, or pretty much any HTTP requests. Rivet can also handle that as well. You would just have to set up the um, script for Rivet to do that. You can use it with the bash script and call like a Node.js file that you have in Rivet to just perform that one-time operation. That's definitely possible. See, any other questions? The floor is all yours. Let's see, well, if there are no other questions, let's see, I guess we can go ahead and give you some time back here. Let's see, that for RTMS support for chat. Most definitely, John. I'm speaking with our developers for Zoom Rivet right now. We are discussing different ways in how we can integrate with RTMS. No promises on exactly if there will be an RTMS API available for Rivet, but I would definitely look out in the future to see what type of integrations we can offer for that. And let's see, Joe Young asks, do you have any resources for a getting started guide with Zoom Rivet? Yes, so if you go, let me go a slide back if you can still see my slides here. If you go to our GitHub, there are two apps available, or two sample apps available with the same structure as the phone call logger app on our GitHub. So you can directly download that and play around with all of the modules offered within that. So that has pretty much all the modules that Rivet offers that you can call within your command line. The last call for any questions. Okay, so if there are any outstanding questions, definitely feel free to contact our support team or post on our dev forum where our developers can help get answers to your questions. I hope everyone continues to have a great time at the Zoom Dev Summit. Thank you again for tuning into my session, and have a great rest of your day.